El cambio climático y la conservación del capital natural son los principales desafíos globales que enfrenta la sociedad. La aceleración en el aumento de la temperatura media del planeta está provocando un incremento drástico en la cantidad e intensidad de desastres naturales en América Latina y el Caribe, poniendo en peligro la estabilidad económica y social de millones de habitantes, especialmente los más vulnerables. Si bien las consideraciones sobre desarrollo sostenible llevan mucho tiempo en la agenda pública, es relativamente reciente la unificación hacia una agenda global que integra de manera holística todos los aspectos relativos al equilibrio entre el ambiente, la sociedad y la economía. Los 17 Objetivos de Desarrollo Sostenible, parte de la Agenda 2030, son esta respuesta y contienen objetivos específicos para los sectores de infraestructura en agua, energía y salud. A pesar de contar con un tercio de los recursos mundiales de agua dulce y apenas el 8,5% de la población mundial, la distribución de esos recursos es desigual entre países y dentro de cada uno. Uno de los principales desafíos es la eficiencia en el uso y extracción de agua dulce. La región necesitará de mayores esfuerzos para alcanzar las metas de acceso a agua y saneamiento, de calidad, de eficiencia e institucionales hacia 2030. Por otra parte, el sector energético cumple un rol fundamental en la mitigación al cambio climático, ya que genera el 47% de las emisiones de gases de efecto invernadero y el 62% de las emisiones de CO2 originadas en América Latina y el Caribe. Si bien la matriz eléctrica de la región es relativamente limpia, la descarbonización en este sector se convierte en un objetivo estructural que requiere de la conversión de un sistema energético basado en combustibles fósiles a otro basado en fuentes primarias, con un menor nivel de emisiones, un mayor componente eléctrico, una reducción de la intensidad energética y desarrollos en captura y almacenamiento de carbón. El equilibrio entre las necesidades y capacidades de los países dará lugar a una transición energética comprometida con el planeta y fiscalmente viable. Finalmente, para el sector de la salud, la pandemia del COVID-19 dejó en evidencia los déficits del sistema y sus dificultades para adaptarse frente a eventos disruptivos que generan aumentos pronunciados y transitorios de la demanda de servicios sanitarios. Una mejor adaptación futura a estos eventos pasa por lograr mayor flexibilidad del sistema a partir de distintas intervenciones relacionadas con financiamiento suficiente, calidad y cantidad de los recursos humanos, infraestructura, prevención de escenarios y recursos y la gestión y calidad de los datos, entre otras. CAF, Banco de Desarrollo de América Latina, presenta el Reporte de Infraestructura en el Desarrollo de América Latina Ideal 2022. Agua, energía y salud para un mejor medio ambiente. Documento que estudia en profundidad el rol de estos sectores estratégicos de infraestructura en el desarrollo sostenible y contiene diagnósticos e identificación de oportunidades y retos para la elaboración de políticas públicas como un elemento clave para la supervivencia de las poblaciones y economías de la región. CAF, Banco de Desarrollo de América Latina.
Muy buenas tardes.
Good afternoon. I am Lorena Dawson on behalf of CAF, Development Bank of Latin America, and Agua y Saneamientos Argentinos, AISA. I'm pleased to greet you all, and also doing it from this very emblematic place, Palacio de las Aguas, the Waters Palace in Buenos Aires, Argentina. Very beautiful place, and as we were saying, an emblematic place that's also welcoming us for the launch of the CAF report, Infrastructure in the Development of Latin American Ideal 2022. Would like to welcome you all here present. Also welcome those who are following the transmission in English and Spanish from the website in CAF, www.caf.com, and also in our CAF YouTube program. Climate change and preservation and natural capital are the main environmental challenges faced by society. This is why this report, Ideal 2022, deeply studies the role of strategic sectors in infrastructure, in development, in sustainable development, especially what has to do with the energy and water sectors. We invite you to join the conversation in social media using hashtag IdealCAF and also mentioning the at Agenda CAF and at ISA underscore official accounts. We will start now, and let me invite Mr. Sergio Díaz Granados, Executive President with CAF, and Mrs. Malena Galmarini, President with ISA, who will be giving the opening remarks. Let's hear it for them.
Bueno, muy buenas tardes a todos. Un saludo muy especial a
Good
todos los
afternoon to everyone. Warm greetings to all the attendees and panelists here in Argentina and, of course, in other latitudes, especially greeting Malena. Thank you so much for offering this place to present the idea well of the most important knowledge reports in CAF. We are really very grateful to be with Malena also because in the couple of years we've been also visiting the different works of ISA, and CAF has become the main funding source of ISA, and we are really proud of seeing the progress of those works. We have almost $1 billion in our portfolio, so ISA becomes a point of reference of what we can do in Latin America in terms of water and sanitation. So Malena, once again, thank you so much for your vote of trust to this bank. Let me first talk a little bit about Ideal. It begins with the premise of conducting a report to see what's going on with our infrastructure, and it gets updated a long time. Let me also highlight the leadership of Cristiana Cineri, Cristian Stupinian, also the infrastructure management in order to develop this report. And the report, of course, is launched with the context of what's going on with climate change and also what's going on with the natural capital and biodiversity in Latin America. We know, of course, that since the mid-80s, the temperature of the planet has gone up. We are reaching warming levels that are well above the industrial levels, 1.1 degrees centigrade. The goal for 2015 is such so as not to go back to bad factors. So we're reaching that limit. So how do we see that reality in Latin America? We can see that in terms of emissions, and this is a conversation where Latin America gets to the global negotiation table with a reality. This region is not a contaminant region. A polluting region, of course, is a region that has emissions, but in proportion to the size of the economy and the size of population, 7% of carbon dioxide and 8.4% if you add the rest of the emissions. This is not a polluting region, but it is really impacted by climate change. When you see this comparing the decades, the 70s and this last decade, the growth and the impact in terms of taxes, in terms of climate change is really drastic. It's 2.4 times more incidence of extreme events of drought and flooding, and almost 3.5% of impact on GDP in the case of Caribbean and 0.4 for the whole region. When you think in terms of the Caribbean region, it's even more dramatic. 95% of deaths due to natural disasters occur in the Caribbean. That is to say, the Caribbean in the Latin American region is like the trenches, those who are on the front line in the battle. So this bank's role and commitment is to make this visible, not only at a regional level, but also at a global level, and also support the voice of the islands of the Caribbean. A month ago or 3 weeks ago, we visited Guyana and Trinidad and Tobago. We left Trinidad and Tobago, and on the next day, we had some rainfalls that practically destroyed great part of the infrastructure, left many of the schools with no educational service for children for almost a week, and so on and so forth. And 2 months ago, we met the first minister, the prime minister of the Vincents and the Grenadines, talking about the post-COVID recovery at the islands of the Caribbean that lost all of tourism. And the 2020, in less than 3 months, there was a volcano eruption in the center of the island. They also the COVID arrived, and also they had a hurricane. And in less than 1 year, that island came from almost 90% of debt over GDP to 220%. So it's impossible for us to keep health in that region with all of these events hidden systematically. And in some points of Latin America and the Caribbean, even harder. It comes a time where many islands in the Caribbean and many Central American countries already identify times of social and economic crisis with a natural disaster. If you go to the island of Providence in the Caribbean, they say this is like this before that hurricane or that other hurricane, and after that it changed. So climate phenomena became kind of a reference point for decision makings or for the impacts on society or the economy. That is a reality. And this report is just checking that. And also a second challenge. And now that we come from you, Faya, also with Christian, it also checks the loss of natural capital in Latin America, the loss of its biodiversity due to this. In the last 30 years, we have lost in many countries over 50, 60% of our forests. Those of us who were born in the 60s, in the 50s and the 60s, we know and we don't recognize today the environment we live in. There is much less vegetation, less fauna than there was there when we were kids. It's difficult for a child born today that this environment they have is not the natural environment that this same city or same country had 50 or 60 years ago. The loss has been really dramatic, and we believe that the action of the development bank should support the efforts to have a better preparation of the nature environments we live in. And we based our report on that question. Also, another key question of how or what's the impact in services of infrastructure, what are the effects of mitigation that have been done or should be taken by infrastructure sectors every time we make a work. It's possible not only to calculate scenarios or models of impact for that work, but also how to adapt it to more extreme events of flooding or drought. What is the challenge in terms of funding? How can we balance climate objectives without affecting some other dimensions that are relevant in terms of infrastructure? And when you see the report, and I will leave that space for Nicolas and the rest of the team, and Christian also explain all of this. But what's clear about this is that the report tells us that we need to have a fair energy transition. We've talked about this within the Development Bank, within Latin America, also in CAF from the very beginning of our management. And I would say, Malena, on September 6th, last year in Lima, with the rest of the team, we wonder whether the development bank should support projects associated to gas as a transition energy. And the answer, my answer, and that of many of us in the city, was that it should be done, that we need to use our natural resources in a smarter way and also to plan in such a way that they can be used for the transition of reduction of greenhouse gases. Latin America will made a commitment at the COP26 last year in order to reduce emissions to reach 2030, most of them with 50% less than what is being emitted this year, and reach 2050 to a zero carbon scenario. To get there, we need to use the resources in the region, and gas is one of them. So that is also included in the report we're launching today of a fair transition. This sort of debates of how to do this, how to use gas as a energy transition. And we talked this yesterday during the lunch with the mayor of Ushuaia. We talked with him about this. Can we optimize the gas plants, reduce emissions, increase energy power, and place plants with the last technology, offer a better service, and use our resource to make this transition in the next 30, 40 years while we get to a massification of non-conventional renewable, whether wind power or photovoltaic. The bank needs to start working on this, starts concerning on a fair transition. That means security of source, respect for nature, reduction of poverty, closing the fiscal gaps. Also, that means an opportunity to better adapt and prepare our economies to face the bigger challenge of climate change and the destruction of natural capital. The other sector that the report includes is water. It's a great reflection of what the control of polluting activities means. This is a great concern in CAP. When we see the SDGs, we know that the wastewater treatment is really lacking behind in Latin America. 41% of wastewaters were only treated. 60% of our waters today are have no treatment at all in Latin America and the Caribbean. And some of the countries are in 90% or 99% of absence of treatment. So there are several emblematic projects in the region that will help us correct that. But maybe this is one of the SDGs where we are mostly lagging behind in Latin America, and it will continue to do so if we are unable to have a quick answer in terms of restructuring and funding and also optimization of the governance of our public uh, companies. The other thing is over-exploitation of water bodies. This is also included in this report. And last, the availability, quantity, and quality of the resource. I think that we also have a pending issue here on the part of Latin America and the Caribbean. And there's another thing that has to do with the borders in the use of waters. We mentioned this last year and also this year with the others, CAF teams. We meet mayors or prefectos, and the main problem is water management. What happens in municipality, water upwards or downwards or upstream or downstream. Is something that should be taken into consideration. We do have a role to articulate and coordinate because this is a big value that we can provide. And what is interesting about all of this is that the bank can increase the levels of cooperation and coordination, the levels of dialogue amongst governments, also to serve the challenges in the border that are really multiple in Latin America and the Caribbean. So with this, I just want to thank you all once again for your presence here. And thank also Malena and Isa for your support to welcome us in this beautiful place, such an emblematic place for the city, but also for Latin America. It's an infrastructure, a thought for centuries ahead and not just for a while. So we are inspired, we are motivated in our infrastructure team and in our corporate team in general to think that way, to think with the greatest level of ambition possible. So thank you once again for the generosity of welcoming us here and supporting the launch of this report. And thank you all for your presence.
Bueno, ¿se escucha? Sí.
First of all, I would like to thank everybody who's present here and participants who are following us from the web. For Isa and for me as the president, it is an honor to see you here, Sergio, Christian. Thank you very much for choosing our palace. And as Sergio just said, this was not a palace built just for one occasion, but it is 100 years old and it was built to show the power of Argentina in the past and the power that I know still exists. This was a place where water was taken care of, where water was stored. We still have the old tanks, by the way, those of you who are here. If you want to take a visit, to take a tour of the building, we are going to show you these parts. It's very impressive, the huge value that water had a century ago. And it's a value that I believe has been lost along the years. As I usually say, we must recover the value of water, what water means for all of us, what water means for the planet as well. And now let me thank CAF for everything that Sergio was just telling us in his presentation. The support is great. Argentina had 8 years when much was invested in water and sanitation, and then the 4 years between 2015 and 2019, that trend was reversed without truly understanding the policy of that time. And in December the 12th, 2019, to the present time, I must thank President of the nation, Alberto Fernandez, for making the decision that drinking water and sanitation have been and still are a policy of this government, a policy that we all want to uphold. We are going to fight for this to be a state policy. For us, this is not expenditure, but rather an investment, as Sergio just said. The fact that our communities can have drinking water, can have sewage systems, speaks for the development of the country and the development of communities as well. So it is very important to understand that there is no water without energy and no energy without water. And we, as a service, are no longer a public utility service, but rather a healthcare and well-being service. So when the drinking water comes to the houses, when sanitation gets houses, there we have the possibility for women to carry less water and have more free time, that they cannot lose job days, that the houses are better cleaned, that we can be cleaner as well. We talked about the COVID pandemic, and of course it was terrible and still is. But I usually say there are other epidemics that are also related to drinking water, such as diarrhea, such as skin diseases, and those who suffer the most are those who have the least. And that's where we should all be present, not just CAF, but the governments, the states, each and every institution, institutional stakeholders. Now, in Latin America, it is impossible to think that Argentina or Latin America can develop this type of projects without the support and the assistance of international players. This is very much needed and required. We do not have enough budget, a country like ours, that can tolerate or can resist these billionaire works. And during the last century, there were two important discoveries, not just for healthcare, but also for the extension of human lives, vaccines, and drinking water. So we believe that based on those two great breakthroughs, we must keep on working to take care of these resources. Sergio was just mentioning how can we give a rational use of these resources? How can we protect human resources? And at ISA, when we talk about water, we also talk about raw water, not just drinking water. I always say that our primary product is the raw water. So it is very hard for everybody to understand that we cannot do without treating wastewaters. Also, we know that there are key stakeholders along the chain, also for the protection of the environment. And that's why from ISA we committed ourselves very much and very strongly First, to raise awareness about the protection of the environment, and then to take care of the raw water, the bodies of water, something that we are also working on. We are measuring the footprint, the carbon footprint, but also the company's hybrid footprint. And we are working in the energy transition. This is very costly as well, particularly in such a big system. ISA has the second largest system of Latin America. So changing the way that we provide energy to each and every destination is very complex, but we are working hard, and also with the community, working on healthcare, the environment, and each and every sector cannot be done by only one entity. We must work together with the community. And just let me thank you once again for choosing this emblematic building to present the reports of this year. These reports are very interesting and very helpful for us to plan our public policies. So once again, I would like to extend my gratitude for your personal attitude, for the institutional approach that you take, and for this ideal that you have, not just towards the continent, but the planet as well. Thank you.
Bueno, vamos a agradecerles a ambos.
Thank you very much. And a round of applause to the two of you. Thank you for being part of this stage. Thank you. And now we are going to move on to the next session. We are going to go straight to the reason for our meeting, the presentation of the infrastructure report in Latin America, Ideal 2022, Walter Kont, Chief Economist at CAF. He's going to share with us the main message of this publication. Welcome, Walter.
Bueno, muy buenas tardes.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much for being present at the presentation of the Ideal report. This is issue of 2022. This is the 11th year since the first edition. And, well, this is a project that we perform at the sector analysis area in the knowledge management sector, together with some colleagues who are present here with us, and everybody is also connected virtually. So the report is related to water and health for a better environment. And the content is divided into 5 sections: sustainable development, infrastructure, the focus on energy, water. The 4th sector is related to healthcare system, and section number 5, intervention opportunities in infrastructure. So, why? Well, the executive president of CAF already talked about it. And in addition to the elements of Chapter 1, we have 2 main pillars: climate change and the challenge imposed on society. That structural breakdown that we've seen in the past years in relation to the planet temperature, the implications that global warming has on a series of events, particularly natural disasters that have multiplied in the past years in terms of quantity, size, and cost, and the focus on the Caribbean as the front line for the main damage. And the second pillar that is also related to the summary that I'm making of this report, the Living Planet Indicator, showing how in the past 50 years the animal population and the forest area has declined, and even more so in relation to the global average. There is a call from the international community that unless actions are taken quickly, the impact will be irreversible. And many of these actions are related to CAF mission, being a green bank in the region, together with inclusion, among others. So in this chapter, we have three main agendas: the agenda on sustainable development goals, the Paris Agreement, and the Convention on Biodiversity. So these three areas are combined on a big sustainability agenda where the SDGs confluence in social, economic, and environmental aspects, together with these climate change issues and the conservation of the natural capital. And we focus all the sectors that were mentioned before and that today we will mention, that has to do with energy. Well, this is a brief sample, but of course you are invited to take a look at the report. These are the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, and much of the importance of the sectors that we prioritize, energy, water, and health, are directly related to these aspects. And of course, they are combined with the other objectives. And in the evolution of the indicators that measure the evolution of these goals to 2030, energy in particular has a favorable evolution. However, water and health, not so favorable. It's just that the situation of the countries in the region together with or in relation to these indicators, and then we have other goals, as you know, international cooperation, institutions, so on and so forth, that do not have any indicator to measure. So once we analyzed these three agendas, we could draw 10 challenges, as you can see on the slide, and two of these in particular are related to energy, four are related to water, and of course, these are related to pollution, access to drinking water, so on and so forth. Then there's one related to the healthcare sector and its resilience. And then there are three challenges related to biodiversity and the environment in general. These challenges are part of the sector. And here we go to chapter 2 of the report. Energy. Energy is a sector that has many, many pages, and I would like to give you just an overview of the three, four main aspects of this sector. And then, of course, you're invited to read the report. So, first, we analyze the greenhouse gas emissions and the history of the emissions. You know that emissions have an increasing trend and they are not expected to decline in the near future. That's why we need to implement decarbonization actions. In the last 5 years, the region has accounted for over 8% to these emissions. It looks like a low figure, but it is in line with the size of the economies and the size of the populations that account for 8% approximately as well. And as part of the greenhouse gas emissions, energy appears as an important sector. Here you can take a look at the pie. And even though less important perhaps, but still the leading factor of the region, it accounts for 47% of emissions in the last 5 years that the measurement was made. Then there are other aspects, subsoil changes, the agricultural sector, and they deserve a whole new story or chapter as part of the report. And on the right, you can see the set of sectors that also contribute to energy emissions, and transport is an important one. Now, the first flag that we must raise is, where are we standing now? Well, this is the energy matrix of the region. As you can see, there are four main aspects to consider here. Natural gas has shifted, as you can see. We can talk about the third energy transition for gas in the world, and it has a place in the energy mix, as you can see, replacing fuels and coal. Now, the second point to consider here is that renewable, non-conventional energies are just one part of the green bar, as you can see on the chart. So there is an other category that includes biomass, but this small increase that you can see accounts for non-conventional sources. However, there is a deficit in the region that not always appears in the primary energy, but we must underscore its existence. 20 years ago, the region was a net fuel exporter. So a part of this replacement of energies has or is accompanied by an important source of emission of those energies that are now being consumed. And the last point that I want to say, there has been an increase in the energy gain, very much focused from 2005 to 2015, an energy intensity decline that we see here in that direction. Now, the second signal, people say that the region's energy mix is the greenest of the world. And the warning we want to say is that this electrical mix accounts for 20% of the energy mix. There is an 80% of consumption that issues and emits, and that is very hard for us to manage. People talk about electrification of transport. And why should we electrify transport? Well, transport is not part of this energy mix. It is part of the fuel consumption. And the other side of the story, the migration demand from emitting fuels into electricity, and this is related to expanding this 20%, making it bigger considering countries' capacities. Now, for the sake of time, you can see the chart on the right. The region doesn't have one energy mix. Each country has its own mix. There are very heterogeneous approaches. One thing is Costa Rica or Paraguay with a high number of renewable sources, and a different story is Barbados or Trinidad and Tobago. And now these two signals that we raised are very important for us to consider the concept of energy transition that has to do with migrating from an energy system based on fossil fuels towards an approach more based on renewable sources, low in transition to net emissions at the destination point, together with technological developments that can strengthen the reduction in the emissions. Of course, the green nitrogen comes to our mind with a higher component of the electrical mix and with improvements, something that was not emphasized here, but we heard it in the past as well. And of course, that transition has or must be accompanied with institutional measures. But that road has not obstacles, but trade-offs, let's say, to solve that are related to the economic and social dimensions of the countries and the sector dimensions of each country. So starting a transition with negative economy is very costly, as you know, and the same thing happens in terms of, let's say, economies with high poverty rates, with employment challenges, and with deficits in fiscal accounts. So, well, if we had time, we could explore more of these things and also the contributions on the part of the states faces challenges in the use of resources. So the sector dimensions very quickly, sectors with a high coverage in urban areas, with deficits in rural areas, with rates that seem to be affordable, but when you compare versus the income, they are not comparable anymore. And finally, the friction. Some economies that rely too heavily on hydrocarbons, for instance, have some sort of bias towards the status quo. And this is what we are seeing here. Those countries with a higher number of hydrocarbons in public accounts have not made much progress in transition. For instance, Uruguay has grown, Chile is growing as years go by.
All of that combines in what we call the agenda of energy transition that aims at decarbonization. The most important elements of decarbonization is here on the right. Penetration of ERNC, the role of natural gas, with its role as density, energy, and also as a backup supply, also technological progress, etc., etc. And energy efficiency as the two elements, for instance, here in the mitigations and the exposure of the sector in terms of its resources and infrastructure in the adaptation phase. So now let me go a little bit faster towards the water sector. The starting point is well, this is a small diagnosis of the preservation of the resource in several dimensions. It was emphasized, but here you can see the figures. There is abundant resource in the region, but it gradually goes down in 20 years window. It has been going down. It's not alarming, but it's a call of attention. With high levels of contamination, this was also mentioned, the percentage of treated waters is relatively low, with dimensions of efficiency that could also be kind of alarming. Low levels of efficiency in terms of resources in the residential use and also the non-residential use. And this is what I show here, but this is framed within the same gap analysis that I mentioned about energy in terms of accessibility, coverage, and quality of the service. And the way to address all of these challenges in the sector here, I'll show you two approaches. The global one that has to do with the resources integrated approach. Here we have developed countries in the region, and it's been measured very recently. Here we have indicators for 2017 and 2020. It's true that that leap that can be shown here is quite small, but it already shows a region that goes towards a direction of generalization or a more widespread approach. Brazil leading, and the rest of the countries following. And the second element of this approach is a circular management that is bringing the components of circular management that have been known from our childhood to the water sector. And just to mention, the countries in the region have already taken measures in that dimension, and probably during the water panel, we will be able to delve a little bit more into it. All of these elements get together, and instead of the energy transition agenda, we call it the agenda of the water resources towards preservation. The elements on the right are the one I mentioned, and we cross them for a matter of time. I cannot emphasize this. It has to do with the changes resulting from the environment that have to do with the adaptation of the sector. In fact, the water sector is more prone to having adaptation actions rather than decarbonization actions. So we combine both diagnosis, that of energy and that of water, and we go to the last section, which is intervention in the infrastructure sectors, focusing on environment. And basically, we open it up into four categories: investment, regulatory adaptation, and institutional adaptation, public policies, and of course, need for funding. So this is just a review of external sources, and some are owned from CAP. The investment gaps for meeting the SDGs are quite important. In the case of water, this was done by the Water Division in CAF, indicating that the investment needs to meet the SDGs aims at half a point of the GDP in the region, and according to the indicators that we use in InfraLatam, which is the project parallel to IDEAL that is conducted with our colleagues from ACLAC and the IDB. This implies a need of triple the investment vis-a-vis the historical ones. The same thing happens with energy. The needs for investment to meet the SDG goals aim at zero point 0.9 and 2 points of the GDP, depending on the speed and the dimension. And this also implies 2 or 3 times more investment. Those investments are in part measuring what we show here is a just something that I'm showing. Of course, we're not going to get into detail of that. Some are sorry to meet the demands, other to obtain a sustainable use and efficiency, other have to do with the resilient infrastructure, and also calling the attention of the fact that in the region we already have investment projects that are associated to nature-based solutions, where the water sector is the main sector for the time being in those solutions. It would take me half an hour to talk about this in more detail, and we have a short agenda, but the first point aims at focusing on non-renewable sources and also for any effect of decarbonization on the part of the demand, and the third effect on non-conventional, non-renewable resources that has to do with all of those modular processes that you hear about, green hydrogen that needs to be supplied with a primary genuine source, not of no level of emission, and that should not compete against the energy sector. So just this small sample multiplied by each of the points that I've just mentioned. In addition to investment challenges, we also have the adaptation and regulatory updating challenges, also broken down into four levels: those related to changes in cost, those that have to do with new technologies, distributed systems. We generally talk about distributed generation in energy, but it's also appearing in water, and risk management. So those challenges or regulatory adaptation means to review the electric regulatory framework, also the water regulatory framework, in order to incorporate components of costs and also adapt certain things that have to do with technological progress. Some have been seen before, with incorporation of new vectors, the incorporation of new technological changes. And last, in the case of water, the same thing, also an adaptation of rates to know about the different costs, different treatment, and the sustainability of the resource, but also balance with measures such as circular economy or maybe scale leveraging, as happens in Peru or in Colombia. So the same thing for the incorporation of distributed systems, the same for the treatment of risks or risk management. Climate risks are difficult. Defining them, quantifying them, incorporating them in a contract and having an optimum allocation is really difficult. If defining that is difficult, you can guess the rest of it. And something that also has to do with transition that is related with assets that are done with a series of rules, and those rules change along the way. So organizing those assets that may be stuck within the transition, we need to see how to minimize the loss value of those assets and improve any alternative use and not confusing that eventual transition resulting from an environmental motivation to risks that have to do with justified technological progress. Last part of intervention elements that have to do with public policies, the social ones that we all know that have to do with grants, that it's kind of a trade-off with elements for promotion of the environment because um, the fiscal aspects are important. Also, others that do not have trade-off, like reaching areas that had no connectivity before, and others that have to do with incentives for decarbonization. For instance, CAF has started to articulate a carbon market or more individual measures of carbon pricing. We discussed a little bit about that, and we leave open the possibility for use. And finally, funding. I've already mentioned a couple of times before that state resources are a little bit limited. The private role has some space. Development banks have their space as well, both for funding, which is the main activity, but also for operations and discovery of projects and opportunities, and also knowledge management as we are doing right now. So I hope I've made a full review of the report. Thank you so much for your attention. I'll leave my contact info there. You can have it there if you need to clarify any doubt. And when we change the screen, we will have a QR, which has the access to the full report and also the executive summary. Thank you so much for your attention.
Muchísimas gracias. Volvemos
Thank you
a
very
darle
much.
un aplauso. A ver que me quedó un poquito alto el micrófono.
Another round of applause.
Ahí estamos bien. ¿Sí? ¿Con el sonido? Bueno, perfecto. Avanzamos entonces. Vamos
So
a
let's move forward. Let's
por su presencia aquí en el
thank
escenario para habernos presentado este reporte
Walter
muy
once
amplio.
again for presenting the idea report. And now we'll continue with what's next. That has to do
Panel.
with a panel.
Si quieren conocer más sobre este reporte,
If you want to know more about this report, you know how to do that, right? Let me tell you, you can download the full publication, the complete publication within the repository of knowledge of CAF, cioteca.caf.com, and also you will be able to find there some other documents. In this particular case, the full document that we've just heard about by Walter Kont. And let me just remind you that you can join the conversation in social media with hashtag IdealCAF, mentioning the accounts at AgendaCAF and at ISA_oficial, at AgendaCAF and at ISA_oficial. Now we will be talking about one of the subjects addressed by Ideal 2022 report, panel Energy for a Better Environment. To do so, we will welcome those who will help us. Nicolas Estupiñán, Director of the Sector Analysis of CAF, he will be the moderator, and the panelists Flavia Rojon, Secretary of Energy for Argentina. Welcome. Juan Ricardo Ortega, President of Grupo Energía from Bogota, and Alejandro Leo, CFO with YPF. Welcome you all. Nicolas, you have the floor. Good afternoon to everyone. Thank you very much for being with us this afternoon. Thank you, Walter, not only for your work and also the rest of the team, but also for consolidating all of the messages that we have in this report. So the invitation is for you to read the report. This is a report that cross-cuts the social and productive infrastructure, and we want to understand how CAF generates that type of recommendations for all infrastructure sectors. So we have really a very good panel right now. We're going to talk about some very important things on the environment, energy, and fiscal aspects that we want to share with you. And we wanted to make it like a conversation. Flavia, thank you very much for being with us. She's the Secretary of Energy in Argentina, industrial engineer from Salta, also an MBA business school, has a lot of experience for more than 15 years. She worked at the Bermejo coal chamber. She has been also Secretary of Mining and Energy in Salta province, and currently, since this year, she's been the Secretary Manager for the Argentine Republic. Thank you very much, Flavia, for being here. Juan Ricardo Ortega is a very good friend of mine. He's also the president of Grupo Energía from Bogota. He is an economist at Universidad de los Andes. He has masters in economy, finance, maths, and is a candidate for PhD at the University of Yale. He's been Secretary of Finance in Bogota, also taxes in Colombia, Deputy Minister for Finance, also work at the IDB, Director of a Program for Alliance of Prosperity of countries north of the countries of the Northern Triangle in Central America, and currently the president of Grupo Energía, Alejandro, also the CFO of YPF, economist at Cuba, a lot of experience at the energy and financial sectors. He's been CEO of 360 Energy Group, CFO of Eugenia, also a very important entrepreneurship on clean energy, vice president of local markets of JP Morgan here in Argentina, also work in New York for the same bank, and currently he is a CFO with YPF. So we have a luxury panel. We'll have two very brief questions in order to meet the agenda. One of the main questions that the report touches upon, and that Walter and also the president of CAF mentioned, is how can we balance this energy transition that is so necessary in order to meet all of the goals with the Paris Agreement and all of the environmental commitments we have, and at the same time be fiscally responsible with the social data for the region. So we have 20% of that grid that which is electric, quite clean, but 80% of it we still have to work on. So how can we accelerate that transition? Secretary, how can we do that in Argentina in order to focus on those sources? Well, first of all, let me thank you for the invitation. I also like to congratulate the organizers of the event. It's an honor for me to be here and talk about these topics. And also, I appreciate the support of CAF. In Argentina today, we're working on our energy transition plan with the premise that this transition should be fair, affordable, and sustainable. I think that a message that has just been left by the COP in Egypt is exactly that, that the energy transition needs to consider the competences and capabilities of each country. In each case of Argentina, and it should be socially fair. In this sense, we are about to present our energy transition plan. And before we talk about that, we're going to talk about energy transition. Today, what's the chapter we are in Argentina? First of all, we are developing our gas infrastructure. Argentina has the second non-conventional gas reserve in the world. We understand that gas is a first step in the energy transition. Argentina has a lot to offer, not just within the country, but also for the rest of the world in terms of energy transition. One of these things we can offer is gas. Today, in the world energy mix, coal has an important weight, and Argentina needs to guarantee self supply and sustainability of through the development of the gas basins. And in the midterm, think about the export. So Argentina should be considered among the first energy suppliers in the world. We are convinced about that due to the conditions we have, due to the political conditions we have. We are a democratic country. We have no conflicts. It should be running as a first player, as energy supplier. First of all, speaking about gas, Argentina nowadays has a very important challenge, which is the construction of gas pipeline Nestor Kirchner. This is being done. This is a strategic work for Argentina that comprises a first step and a second step or a second phase included within the Transportar plan in order to supply competitive gas, Argentine gas, to the whole energy mix that will also be a competitive edge for the development of the industry. Today, Argentina's energy mix has a floor, which is liquid fuel. We need to replace and clean this mix, first of all with gas and then with renewable energies. Argentina also has a great advantage in terms of hydrogen. We are working on a bill in order to promote hydrogen in Argentina because Argentina has great potential in terms of renewable energies, solar in the northern part of the country, wind power at the south. It ranks in the best places in the world for renewable energies. And to develop these renewable energies, Argentina again needs infrastructure. So we have already finished a master plan of transportation lines of high uh, voltage lines that Argentina needs in order to develop these renewable energies projects, we can increase the weight of renewable energy within our mix. Today, Argentina, and during the last month, it has a production record in terms of gas, and it also holds a record in the production of renewable energies. The demand last month was covered by approximately 15% of renewable energy, so that is record in Argentina. In this energy transition roadmap, Argentina today started, and we are really emphasizing the population to talk about energy deficiency and energy saving. First of all, we have already implemented a redirectioning of energy subsidies, and in this um, direction and fairer rates, we seek that the state continue to support lower income sectors, but those with higher incomes and those sectors that are able to pay the cost of energy, they should do so, but also being aware of an implementation of a regulation with a series of consumption caps that will be subsidized and some others won't, because we need to re-educate ourselves in terms of our consumption habits and also educate on the efficient use of energy. We also have programs of energy efficiency for various sectors, also industrial and commercial ones, because we understand that in order to talk about energy transition, first of all, we need to talk about energy efficiency. That is a roadmap that our country has today with an important challenge ahead. We understand that Argentina is a country that has a lot of opportunities in terms of energy. Today, the world has placed energy at the core, and Argentina has all the conditions to become a very important player as a provider, a supplier of uh, LNG or gas in the world. And as Argentina has this window of opportunity for the internal development, the internal development can help the sector to play a very important role in terms of exporter. So the energy sector is part of the solution to the problems that we have today in terms of situation with the Argentine macroeconomy. Argentina also will soon be one of the first three lithium suppliers this year in the World Cup. There's a very important potential and critical minery is also a sector where Argentina can continue to explore, has a lot of potential. And we're also working in that sense to develop the industrialization of lithium, both in storage, batteries, and electromobility. So that's the roadmap we are focusing on in Argentina. And again, we understand that transition and energy efficiency is a window of opportunities for Argentina locally as a development vector for our country and also in terms of what Argentina can offer to the rest of the world.
Great, very complete roadmap. And I was thinking about two specific topics for Ricardo. This idea of reconverting the region, not just to self sustain itself, but export further. So, Grupo Energía is a company that has many operations in Latin America. So, how do you see the regional market? And what is Grupo Energía doing in order to target at efficiency? So we just talked about efficiency and the report mentions that. So how is Grupo Energía positioned in efficiency and in regional markets using gas as a transition fuel? First of all, thank you, CAF, for the invitation. And I would like to congratulate the minister. This idea is very, very important, and we share the same ideas. We just would like to add a couple of things. What we see in the countries of the north of Latin America, in Chile, Medellin, Lima, the quality level must be at the same level or before the energy transition. So when we take a look at pulmonary diseases for cooking with timber, Guatemala, Peru, Ecuador. Guatemala has 50% of primary energy consumption in timber, and the impact of COPD in women who cook for 30 years with wood, with timber, is dramatic. So, unfortunately, much of this is expressed as if it was the same, but the problem of Latin America, and Kaf said it very well, is very different. We are marginal uh, in production. So in Peru, we have very good approach. We are trying to change the culture of the long haul transportation, heavy weight transportation. This is terrible in terms of quality of air impact, and studies show that compressed gas in flat territories create a good energy density and autonomy up to 800 kilometers, and the cost is very low. And we are having a change in the culture of the truck drivers, discussion, dialogue, education. We are giving subsidies in the capex costs with gas companies in Peru, but people find it hard to shift to compressed gas trucks. We have the documents, we have everything so that they can take a chance here for the benefit of more competitiveness in transport, zero emissions, almost zero emissions. And that is for us one of the most important topics to discuss. And any support as to how can we change the culture of people. Part of this process requires learning new technologies, more efficient technologies. And then there's another point that concerns us that has to do with adaptation. We are having terrible costs in terms of landslides, the impact of climate change in Peru, Colombia. We've had $18 million worth in losses Colombia is terrible in terms of the impact of natural disasters, and the costs of the insurance and reinsurance has skyrocketed. So what about gas? What about storage? Who pays for that? Who can design the storage processes? Because reliability in storage is a problem in Latin American countries. This is not part of the regulatory agendas. And unless that is quickly solved, if we cannot supply, we are going to lose many clients. So people expect a reliable system. And for me, this is one of the greatest threats in the future and one of the risks that we face in gas supply. What about supply and resupply related to adaptation issues? Thank you, Ricardo. And that is a central topic. We always talk about mitigation, and much of the agendas are focused on mitigation. And of course, adaptation is something that we need to focus on. And a bank like CAF has a lot to provide in terms of identifying answers to these questions, but also financial support. So thank you for your thoughts. Alejandro, what about you? You know that CAF has been a great partner with YPF. Much has been done together. But how do you see the role of YPF in this transition, in strengthening gas as a transition fuel? I believe that the CAF president was very clear when he said that that is the transition fuel in Latin America. So it has to follow a fair transition, equally responsible. So YPF, what is it working on in this matter? And like Juan Ricardo said as well, how are you protecting yourselves in order to guarantee reliability? First of all, thank you very much for the invitation to present at this event. It's a pride, and thanks to CAF as well that has supported us for so long, and recently it has financed an effort that YPF is making to improve the quality of fuel, particularly related to the environment, to lower the sulfur component by 50 to 70% in fuel and gas oil. And so thank you very much to CAF for supporting us in that endeavor. And in relation to your question, well, when I heard the president of CAF saying that they asked themselves whether they had to support the gas growth and development. Unfortunately, he gave us a positive answer in that idea. And that is so rewarding because YPF has a fundamental role. We, in line with what the secretary mentioned, Argentina has a huge potential to contribute to the energy transition, providing not just renewable energies, and YPF is also taking part there, but as the leading gas producer of Argentina, with a country that has the second non-conventional gas basin in the world, and not just in terms of quantity and size, but also the great level of efficiency that we achieved throughout the years in the development of the Vaca Muerta field. And Argentina has been taking the lead in Argentina, in the world, in terms of the energy mix, from the discovery of Loma La Lata, conventional gas field, where and when natural gas was included in the matrix, but also the 2012 development of Vaca Muerta was great. We were very much concerned at that time about the self-reliance, and clearly after Vaca Muerta, we were able to see the light at the end of the tunnel. So we clearly see that thanks to the growth that we have in gas production, only in the last year, if we compare the last 9 months versus the same period, 2021, YPF grew in non-conventional gas production by 51%. So thanks to the investments made in infrastructure, the Nestor Kirchner gas pipeline, we are able and we will be able to supply. And we can start dreaming about becoming a gas exporter for the region and for the world.
mundo a partir de lo que es un proyecto muy ambicioso.
This is a very ambitious process and project, an LNG plant. This is a project that we announced with our Petronas partners. We announced an MOU and a study. Again, this is a very ambitious project that can have a total of 25 million tons a year of production, of course. We are going to start stage by stage, but this is the capacity that we foresee. And thanks to the efficiency of Vaca Muerta, 10 years going through the learning curve, that can be seen in oil, but also in gas, to such an extent that we can have a global competitive gas that, considering the adequate regulatory conditions and sustainability conditions, we are confident that this can be a great opportunity to contribute to the global transition to replace coal as, of course, a more polluting fossil. And like the secretary said, we at the same time would be contributing to the country's economic growth. So not just the environmental aspect would be reinforced, but the economy of the country. And YPF has the opportunity to become a net energy exporter of natural, liquefied natural gas and increase the central bank foreign currency reserves and unlock the economy. So YPF has a key role to contribute. In addition to all the actions we have, we want to reduce our footprint, carbon footprint, and Vaca Muerta field allows us to be one of the lowest carbon companies in the world, reaching very competitive levels per barrel. So we are very well economically positioned to compete in price, but also to compete in an eco contribution oil that will be required for many years more in the future, because that also guarantees the quality of life of mankind. So the transition must be fair, and in that transition, we need to guarantee the affordability of energy for everybody, clearly for our region and for the world. That's why, again, the role of YPF is key to the country's economy and to the energy transition, thanks to gas and more eco-friendly oil. Thank you, Alejandro. Let's take 30 seconds to ask everybody and ask you if you could ask something from CAF, and we have our president here, what would you ask CAF? Maybe support, assistance, institutional strengthening. Maybe you need some sort of assistance in international cooperation. So, Madam Secretary, what would you ask? Infrastructure, infrastructure, infrastructure. Argentina needs very strong support in that regard in order to follow this path of efficiency, in order to have a competitive energy mix. Infrastructure in the gas pipeline, infrastructure in transportation, we are lagging behind with transformative stations and all those aspects. Infrastructure. Ricardo? I believe that the world needs to be able to trust the gas industry. I was in Europe not long ago talking to the business sector, and they are very much aware of the methane emissions and the monitoring and measurements. So accountability must be confirmed, otherwise the gas position will be aggressive. And there are renowned institutions that can help us with those measurements so that we can start a good gas-based industry with a close control and monitoring on the methane emissions. Thank you. Alejandro, Well, I will be a little bit disruptive. Obviously, I ask support from CAF in our gas project that we have, an ambitious project to export LNG to the world. But also, I would like to reconsider the opportunity of financing certain activities with a lower carbon footprint of oil in particular. Just as a year ago, gas seemed to be a hydrocarbon that would not be part of the financing mix of many institutions. And now this has changed. I believe that contributing to crude and to oil with a lower carbon footprint is also a possibility. So just consider this idea as well. Thank you very much. A round of applause to our panelists. And now we move on to the water panel.
Renovamos el aplauso para ellos. Muchísimas gracias.
Another round of applause to Nicolás Estupiñán, Flavio Rochón, Juan Ricardo Ortega, and Alejandro Leu. Thank you very much for your comments in this panel. Now we are going to move forward to the next panel, environmental challenges for water resources, addressing the topics of the Ideal 22 report. We would like to invite onto the stage the moderator of this panel, Ángel Cárdenas Sosa, Manager of Urban Development, Water and Creative Economies with CAF. Welcome to the stage, and also we would like to call Pilar Barría, advisor of the Ministry of the Environment of Chile, Office for Fair Ecological Transition, Elisa Belfiore, international expert of the environment, University Torquato di Tella, and Emilio Lentini, international expert in institutional matters, urban and sanitation services. Welcome you all onto the stage. And now I give the floor to Mr. Cardenas. He's going to moderate this panel on environmental challenges for water resources. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Another renowned panel for today's presentation of our ideal report. And during the introduction of the event, Mr. Granados and the chairwoman of ISA gave some ideas about the importance of water and water management and how water is on the spotlight. We always say that without water, there is no nutrition, education, healthcare, growth. And without water, we wouldn't have a true and effective fight against climate change. Water offers a productive view, affordable perspective for humans, but it's also a driving force of resilience. And that is why CAF has been so strong in financing knowledge and these matters. So the report also concludes much of this effort. By the way, congratulations to Walter, Nicolas, and the whole team for this great effort. So very quickly, allow me to introduce Pilar Barria. She is the advisor from the Ministry of the Environment of Chile, Office of uh, Fair Ecological Transition. She is an engineer and she holds a PhD. Elisa Balfiore is an international expert at the University Torquato di Tella. She holds a PhD from the University of Minnesota. And Emilio Dentini, international expert. He was manager of very important companies and consultant in many multilateral entities. So welcome you once again. I will try to be very brief. My first question for Pilar in relation to this idea that we mentioned at the very beginning. There are some asymmetries in terms of the water availability in the region, in terms of geographical distribution, and also the water availability plus pollution. So my question is, How is the public sector in the region addressing this matter? Hello, thank you for the invitation first, and thank you for the report that highlights very essential aspects that are necessary in order to carry out an adequate water resource management in order to adapt ourselves to climate change. In relation to the geographical variability that is a reality in Latin America, but Chile in particular is an open example. We have a highly diverse territory with water availability and rainfalls that go from 50 millimeters a year in the northern area to 3,000 millimeters in the south. However, where much of the population is, there are little rainfalls that have been affected gradually by the climate change impact. So, this is a reality that has been worsened by the mega droughts affecting us for the past 13 years. So, in terms of sectors, in Chile, the climate change framework legislation was approved, establishing a series of mechanisms and also commitments for 17 of the 23 ministries of the country. So, particularly those sectors that are water intensive, such as the agricultural sector, mining, drinking water, sanitation. And all these are measures to mitigate, but also to adapt ourselves and secure water supplies. Then we have other measures related to the water basin planning. This is something that we must improve in Chile. We don't have uh, any basin planning in Chile, but there are more regional admin issues that do not have any specific aspects. Then we have some terms and deadlines to implement, 10 years, but also related to this climate change legislation. We are working to promote a basin council policies so that we can have a governance mechanism to provide sustainability to planning, considering the different realities, hydrological realities, social realities that there are in the territory.
Thank you very much. I live with something that you will also find the report and the different CAF publications, the vision of the basins management, and to see how to start working on a regulatory effort in all countries in order to develop the sector even further. Emilio, what's the main trend in terms of water and sanitation services? I'm sorry, I didn't hear my name. Sorry, Emilio. Thank you for your invitation, and I would like to highlight something specific about this report. I became an addict now, many years. I have in my database almost all of the figures, but I really welcome this new document with incorporation of the problem of health. Uh, that I would not say that resumes, but maybe it sets the forefront the traditional relationship of water and sanitation services with health. Evidently, in the last pandemic has reminded us about the beginning and about the development in Latin America and the rest of the world of water and sanitation services as a way to fight the pandemic. We could continue talking a lot about this, but I'm really pleased about the fact that the health sector be incorporated in the debate of infrastructure that is so much related with the water sector and also with the energy sector. The previous panelist also mentioned this problem. As for the asymmetries in the water sector, for sure, this is my personal opinion, what comes around in water and sanitation services, the fulfillment of the Sustainable Development Goal. And I would say that this is also seen in the report, what I've been able to see, the executive report, the executive summary, but Walter Kahn also mentioned one of the graphics included in the report, where you can clearly see the level of delay in terms of fulfillment of the water-related SDGs. But with some creativity and some imagination, I was able to identify that there are other four SDGs that are lagging even further behind. If I'm don't These are a sustainable development, poverty, gender, and the other one, well, uh, I don't remember right now, but these are SDGs that even though they are linked to a cross-cutting subject, which is poverty, in these five elements that are significantly lagging behind, we can see the interrelationship with the water sector. We could speak about each of them, but um, afterwards with the report, the audience will be able to get more information about it. But it's important to highlight that in the case of water and sanitation, this is probably one that is lagging behind the most in Latin America to meet the SDGs. So even though it has been recognized that the SDG goals in terms of water and sanitation that are practically reaching universal goals for safe health, water and sanitation would implicitly include the treatment of wastewaters, even though this is also addressed in another paragraph of the SDG, it becomes very important. And many analyses made by the joint program of the UNICEF and the World Health Organization defines as safe sanitation in those cases where the waters are treated prior to their disposal. But before I conclude, I would say that the biggest asymmetry in the sector is the lack of compliance with the SDGs as they were set for 2030. Probably only one country in the region may be heading that way, almost meets them all, but it's just one among almost 30 countries in the region. In many of those, goals won't even be fulfilled, not even by 2040 or 2050, because as we've seen, in order to somehow get back in pace, a pace that was really affected by the 2 years of the pandemic, to do so, some countries even need to multiply by five folds or three folds the levels of investment in relation to the GDP of the last few years. So to conclude, let me highlight that most of the population that and this that do not have access to service, And most of that population is due to a vulnerable condition. Many of them live at the peripheries of large cities and others in rural areas are the social groups that should wait 20, 30, 40 more years in order to be able to access services that are considered as human rights by the rest of the nations. Thank you very much, Emilio. You will find this also in the report and also in several publications and study we've conducted. The estimate is that the investment of infrastructure from now to 2030 should be multiplied by threefold to meet the goals, but that does not take into consideration the efficiency of that. When you see the levels of governments, probably you get that figure. Elisa, so with climate related view, always different events and different applications. We mentioned that climate crisis is a water crisis, and when we see the contributions of countries in the regions, they mostly emphasize on adaptation and resilience. There are spaces to propose different actions in those sectors. Yes, it's true. I always tend to uh, consider things with a climate change related view. So the interaction of climate, water, we knew that climate phenomena will bring about greater rainfalls, more frequent rainfall, more intense, and also greater droughts. So we have the extremes here. So we see that the naturally humid areas become more humid and those that are dry become drier. So something that comes up from that is that the management of the water resource that has always been critical and difficult to deal with becomes even more complicated because we have this uncertainty on the climate shocks that will be developed. So if we look it that way, and we result in adaptation policies. We say, okay, we will have great rainfall and floodings. We need to build walls and dams, and we need to somehow do some patchwork. And it's okay because where we're standing now, we think that the temperature will go up by at least 1.5. Those shocks and rainfalls will happen, and we need to be prepared. But this is just an adaptation. This is just a patch. It's raining a lot. Let's build a dam. The other look is to see what we can do in order to control so that we don't have so much rainfall and somehow control the climate phenomena. And in that case, the water cycle, and it's not that I have details here, but the water cycle has a role of regulating the climate. So preserving the water cycle so that it works fine is in itself a mitigation policy, if you will, because it will help us mitigate climate change at some point. So I think that we should start looking at that way, and that will um, put value in caring for the resource, but not just because it's a natural resource and we need to care for it, but because that also will help us control the climate change phenomenon. For instance, water has a role in the emission capture in oceans, in wetlands. The big water reserves have a role there. So in as long as that we can reserve those water bodies, that is mitigation policy per se. So also what we are observing in different countries, different companies is the act of being carbon neutral. If I try to not to emit, or if I emit, I try to offset it with a different factor. So we need to be water neutral as well, following the same logic. If we are extracting a natural water resource, we somehow need to replace it with the same amount and same quality. And so businesses should also have this goal of water neutral. It's starting to be mentioned, but it's really lagging much behind than the carbon neutrality. What's the role of the academia there? How do you see the role of the academia? How can the academia support that or contribute? Do you think that they can also promote the discussion, or is it more from the public sector? Or, well, the academia goes along the policy. I think it's also lagging behind when we go back to talking about adaptation, and we've been also analyzing this in the reports. I've also contributed with this one here. And if you want to ask yourself, what's the cost of infrastructure that we need to build? We don't have those studies. We don't have that info. And that can be provided by the academia, but it's like, the chicken and the egg. What you find the most is, and the strongest development on the part of the academia is in mitigation policies in terms of prices in the carbon emissions, but because international policy has gone around that. And water is lagging behind, but I think it's gaining field. And in as long as we put it on the bargaining table, it will become, or it will be materialized. Thank you. And in line with that, with the fact that it's still gaining, water is still gaining territory, let me talk to Christian Asinelli here. And if I ask you in 3 minutes, and understanding also the intersection of climate change and the water sector, we are in the framework of developing our new strategy 2023-2026. And we are working together with these two sectors, positive biodiversity, climate change, and water. What would be the recommendations that you would give to him in terms of the subjects that we need to address? Well, I think that a very relevant subject, and also adding to what was already said, is nature-based solutions, green infrastructure. This is something we have been owing for many years. It's part of a debate from politicians and the academia. I come from the academia. I'm just starting with public politics, but we're trying to boost this. But we still have many gaps in order to integrate nature-based solutions and green infrastructure because it has to do with quantification. For instance, what's their role, how much can they regulate, what's the amount of water or soil that they can maintain, and at the same time it allows to accumulate water. And on the other hand, also the business model that allows this to be effective for the economy. So that on the one hand, and also because it also mitigates climate change. So it's very necessary. The loss of ecosystems that we are experiencing is quite dramatic. In the case of the metropolitan area of Chile, a full lake was became dry and it was lost, and it's the point of no return. So we have less recharging of the aquifers. The forest is also being reduced, and that also increases local temperature and reduces um, availability, water availability. So I think this is something really necessary. And the other one is water efficiency. Definitely the manned management. Thank you, Elisa. I think that I would frame it into the question that you made about mitigation and adaptation. So on the part of mitigation, as I said, the role of wetlands, um, mangroves, and others, because it implies a public good. So I think that we need to work with governments, and that's an area where the bank may play a role in developing a strategy with various governments because they can reach them. And I think that the solution should come from that sector. And in terms of adaptation, due to the scale of investments done, everything that has to do with infrastructure in containment, and because we know that droughts and flooding will come, so we need to prevent, but we also need to be prepared. And due to the dimension, I think that the bank could also play a role there. Thank you, Emilio. I would the first recommendation, I know that you have it present in your minds. I'm talking to CAF, but using a term that I generally hear from CAF directives, if we continue the same, it will be very difficult to change. And I'm speaking particularly about water as a service, but also in terms of management of water resources, what has to do with organization by basins and the governance of water basins, administration or stewardship, but also achieving instruments that will support the funding of the necessary infrastructure that will prevent those resources from being lost in inefficiencies. So my impression is that multilateral banks have been insisting on this matters for a while, but something's not working in the sense that in many countries in the region, those very important resources for infrastructure generally are applied and they're generally diluted into the inefficiencies of uh, the functionalities they have. The level of loss in the region on average is 40%, and there are systems that even lose 50%, and some others might get to 60%. So that's the first one. The second one, focusing on the rural aspect and informal settlements is something that needs to be made. There we have approximately 70%, 80% of the service deficits. And last, also pay attention to what has to do with water resources and the support to the basin stewardships and to generate effective planning instruments, not only talking about a strategy, but planning in terms of management and managing to have autonomous authorities capable of managing, and this has to do with the governance of this important instrument and organization to be leveraged in an efficient and rational manner from the environmental point of view, talking about the water resource. Thank you very much. There are many tasks and homeworks. We have a great roadmap. Let's hear it for our panelists. Thank you very much for being with us.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you. A round of applause to our panelists. Thank you for this second panel. Very interesting panels with keynote experts and speakers. Thank you for sharing these sessions with us. Thank you, Angel, Pilar, Elisa, and Emilio for their comments. We are reaching the end of this session. This has been a very enriching conference that gives us very valuable information and views related to climate change and the impact on the energy and water sectors. Up next, we are going to invite onto the stage Leandro Gorgal, Under Secretary of International Financial Relations for Development of Argentina, and Cristiana Sinelli, Corporate Vice President of Strategic Programs with CAF. Welcome to the stage. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Leandro, Under Secretary of International Financial Relations, and also as Director for the Argentine government with CAF. We would like to send our greetings to Carolina España, our Executive Vice President, our Knowledge Manager, and the entire CAF team who's here with us. Thank you, Malena Galmarini and Aisa team. They are helping us here, and as the Executive President said, they have given us the possibility of having this wonderful place for the presentation of the ideal reports. And As was mentioned at the very beginning, Jose Barbero probably is around. He was one of the founders of the Ideal Report, and Nicolas Estupiñán, who coordinated the entire team together with Walter and their team, a vast team of talented people, so that we can finally have this wonderful project every year presented by CAF, and that allows us to create knowledge for action into programs, investment projects that we develop in each and every country of Latin America and the Caribbean. And it is very important to be in Argentina because, as the executive president said at the very beginning, we have a history of work with AISA, many years working together, not just observing an excellent relationship among the teams, but also a great contribution to the impact of public policies developed by Argentina through the public policies related to water and sanitation. And we've resumed a very ambitious agenda, around $1 billion in investments. It is one of the biggest investments in water in Latin America and the Caribbean for a country. And of course, there are many questions that the report raised and questions that were already answered by the panelists. Thank you to the two panels, and thanks to this great idea by Nicolas and by Angel to try to ask these public policy decision makers so that they could help us understand how we can cooperate better in Argentina and in the water strategy that we are planning to implement in CAF. So, in terms of water, we are the development bank that has the largest financing schemes for water and environmental aspects, but not just infrastructure, but also healthcare, having included healthcare, particularly after the pandemic, in our policies. Supporting countries has been a success story, and our manager for human relations and social development is working very hard to combine the social work, the healthcare work, and the education work, a triad that we at CAF are convinced is one of the key objectives to improve so that we can improve the quality of life of citizens in Latin America and the Caribbean. Without further ado, I just want to say that the report is very interesting. Reading it, rereading it, and trying to become fans of these reports. These reports give us information that we can transform into action, and this is the key challenge from CAF. How can we, from knowledge, from the report, read, ideal report, and all the tools that we develop at CAF, can clearly help us go beyond the barrier of knowledge to improve public policies, the main goal that we have in CAF. And to conclude, now that Pope Francis, and we know that he is, of course, Argentinian, Latin American, and Caribbean, he is a global leader who works for the environment. He always raises awareness and helps us put these topics on the agenda. I like his phrase. He says, we need to have a conversation that get us all together because the environmental challenge we face is very interesting to all of us. And we need to build this dialogue among all the public stakeholders and also private stakeholders, civil society, the academia, in order to find, as we said before, if we don't do what we must do to be on the verge of the cliff, but go back, we are the generation that unless we do that, we won't be able to give our children a better world. And for that, we need to make radical changes. We are here in order to bring these radical changes into action, supporting the actions of Latin American and Caribbean governments, and now from Argentina. Thank you, Leandro, for being with us now. Thank you, Christian, and thanks to CAF for the invitation to close this event. And by the way, congratulations, Christian, and your team who worked so hard in this ideal report. This is a classic by CAF that provides very important information and knowledge in terms of infrastructure in particular, so much needed in this region. This is a regional public good that CAF provides for the region. So this is not just a bank that lends money, but a bank that provides develop development based on knowledge generation in relation to the dimensions addressed by the report, well, all the panels addressed these aspects very well, and we can quickly understand that the weak point of sustainable development in Argentina and in the region has to do with the energy sector, the water management aspects, and how do we address climate change, the consequences from climate change, and we in the region are very much exposed to those consequences. And how can we help mitigate climate change? Well, I believe that the report addresses all these aspects very well. From the international financing perspective, we are working with this conceptual framework when it comes to prioritizing international financing projects. And in terms of water and sanitation, we have a big portfolio in Argentina. We have 37 projects worth 5 billion pesos, including all international credit banks. With CAF, we have $900 million, and in water and sanitation in Greater Buenos Aires, and also all across the country, in order to close the access gaps to safe water for those populations who still cannot access such a vital resource as water. And the same things for energy. We have very important projects that are being analyzed together with CAF. Madam Secretary explained it very well. Gas has become a very important element, even more so with the situation of the war and the widespread increase in the price of energy. I believe that today Argentina has an opportunity to exploit a resource as gas for the benefit of energy transition, but also a resource that can help us manage our public accounts, something that Argentina needs to solve. So again, we do need a development model that cuts across not only environmental protection, but also provide a low emission economy, an adapted economy for climate change, but socially inclusive and fiscally sustainable. So thank you, CAF, once again for your support, and thanks to each and every expert that has participated in today's session. Thank you very much, and a round of applause to the closing panel. Thank you, Leandro Morgal and Cristian Asinelli, the two of them, to formally close this meeting. But before you leave, if you wish to take a tour around the Museum of the Water Palace, you can go to the reception desk so that you can arrange the tour. You should do it. It's a very nice visit to make. And once again, thank you very much to all those present. Thank you for this report of Latin America and the Caribbean Ideal 2022. You can download the publication at the repository of CAF, Scioteka SC .caf.com. You will find the full report there on behalf of CAF and ISA. We would like to thank all of you who are here with us at the Water Palace in Buenos Aires and online to those participants from Latin America and the Caribbean. Have a nice evening. See you next time.